All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Steps Live. For today, we have special guest Josh here to discuss with me and with all of you the qualities of a good shoe and a little bit about footwear. Bear with me. I'm going to have to change the screen sharing situation about halfway through and bring up a handout that in a reference that could be helpful for you that we will be sharing on our website and in the post when we post this video as well. So,
thanks, Sam. So this is the first time I've done one of these live sessions, so bear with me a little bit. It's kind of interesting talking to a computer screen rather than a person. Interaction is a little different, which is why I've got Sam here to help get me out of trouble when I get off on a tangent. This is an interesting topic and a good topic to have, I think, right now, because at this point in our society and our culture, you almost need a PhD to go and buy a pair of shoes. You know, they make shoes for people who supinate or pronate or underpronate or overpronate, or they need guidance or they need stability. And, you know, it gets a little overwhelming when you want to think about, well, what kind of shoe should I have to help me meet my rehabilitation needs? So we're going to kind of cut through some of that. I'm going to try and keep this fairly simple and talk about the qualities of a good shoe. I want to make sure, first of all, that I mentioned we're not endorsing any particular shoe. We're talking about the qualities of a shoe and who might benefit from those types of qualities. Another thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, not all things are created equal. Sam, you know, a company like Kohl's may call New Balance and say, you know, I really like your 1070 shoe. We like the look of it. We think it'll sell real well in our store, but we can't sell it for the $140 that you guys need us to sell it for. So can we get a version that would cost maybe $70? And New Balance will go back and they'll look at their drawing board and they'll see, you know, what kind of cuts they can make in their quality and their materials and things like that, and see if they can produce a shoe at a different level to get it to that price. Now, I'm not calling out New Balance here. This is, a lot of companies do this. And they actually have gotten a little better about it. They might name it a little something differently now. But you can go in and look at the shoe and it'll look real similar to the one you might see on Amazon that costs a lot more. And so the point I want to make there is, you know, you kind of get what you pay for in the materials and the build on these types of shoes. So it's important to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Another just little lead in and intro to this is just to talk really quickly about balance. And we primarily use three systems to sort of establish where we are in space. That's our vestibular system, which is in your middle ear. Our visual system, which, you know, of course, tells us where we are in space. And then our proprioceptive system and what you feel and your understanding of where your joints are at any point in time. But even sort of with that, another thing that I like to think about is interpretation of space and sort of your experience about that. And so, for instance, the example I can think of right now is our regulators. In this room, we've got 4 regulators called walls. And I know, for instance, if I'm back here, I can't go much farther than what this wall is going to let me do, right? It gives me a boundary. It gives me a point of reference where I can understand that, and it lets me know what my limitations are. And so for some of these attributes of your shoes, you know, if we're talking about support or stability, what I'm really kind of talking about, Sam, is regulators. You know, something that's going to provide an understanding of where your foot is in space or on the ground, and what the limitations are.
So kind of giving your foot walls.
Right. Well,
allowing it to know where it is in space.
Correct. I might even think of it more like boundaries on a football field, right? You can go out of bounds. There's no physical limitation to stop you from going out of bounds, but something happens when you go out of bounds, right? And the same would be with these shoes. You know, if you push into the side of your shoe, a good shoe will provide some sort of an indicator that, okay, you are now entering an out of bounds zone. And that's important because, you know, when you're doing things correctly, you really only have 2 points of contact with the earth, right? Your feet. And so you need that information to help you understand where your ankle is, where your hip is, where your low back is, and how all those things are stacking up together to give you what we'd call a balanced body. One other just simple concept to get through before we start looking at these shoe attributes is that your foot really has 3 sections, and I've got these shoes set up like this for a reason. So I can kind of show you, you've got your rear foot, which is your heel, basically, and this is the loading section of your foot. If you are standing and there is weight on a foot, it should be going down through your heel. You've got your midfoot, which is your arch, basically, and you know, a good way to think about an arch is a trampoline. It should go down, it should go up. It should go down, it should go up. And this is where a lot of shock is absorbed through your system and returned when you're propelling yourself. And then your forefoot is your pusher. Its job is to push you to your other foot or into the air, whichever, you know, if you're jumping or if you're running or if you're walking. So it's important to understand the 3 sections of a shoe because, well, this is one of the areas we're going to look at in just a second. So let's flip it over to
we're going to be
document here.
Sharing screen here. Just one moment. All right, so here we are.
Okay. So this,
I can be your cursor if you would like.
Okay, sure. So this document I put together probably about 12 years ago, actually. And it just kind of talks about qualities of a good shoe in a couple of different directions. So in part 1 up there, or area 1, I've got at that time, I think that was an Asics foundation, I believe. So what you're looking at in that row is the stiffness of the heel back itself, right? How stiff is this? This is when I was describing walls a moment ago. You can, yeah, oh, that's great. Thanks. When I was describing walls a moment ago as regulators, I was really thinking about this, right? Your heel fits down inside of this. How stiff is that? Is that going to give you a lot of drift? Sometimes you want to regulate that drift on people. If someone has a lot of extra movement in their foot or ankle or calcaneus, or maybe a lot of tone towards inversion, you might want something out here to help them understand that there's only so far you can go, right? Other folks might need a little bit of fluidity, and they might need a little bit of a less heel counter, but still in general, you want something stiff. I got an example of a good shoe, and I've got an example of Julia's telehealth shoe where she's not standing up, walking around on her feet all day. And this thing doesn't have any stiffness to it, right? So if she was going to be up walking around all day working with patients, or if she was going to go on a hike in the woods or even shopping in the mall for 4 or 5 hours, this is not something that would really give her a lot of benefit from if she had rehabilitation needs, okay? The second one is the amount of give on a heel, and you know, a lot of the shoe companies have gotten a little better about this over the years, but the amount of gel or air or, you know, goop, whatever they're putting in their shoes that they're trying to sell you, typically has an outside orientation to it. They usually put less on the inside of the shoe and more on the outside, and that's meant for people who tend to roll in, and they'll give them a little gel over here to help them tip out. Well, the reason that can have a negative impact is most people, when they hit the ground with their foot, excuse me, they hit towards the outside or not exactly on the center of their heel. And so if you have a surface over here that's more squishable, then when you hit the ground, you're going to sink farther. And if I do it from this angle, you'll see here, you hit the ground, you're going to sink farther, and then you have to roll harder to get to your big toe to take your step towards your other foot that's going to be over here. And that roll is going to happen in your midfoot, in your arch, and it's going to cause you over time to maybe lengthen some ligaments in your arch or reduce some stability in this part of your foot. So when we look at shoes, we usually go in, we give them a little squeeze over here and see, you know, how compressible is this? It's real squishy. Now I'll give you a little background. This shoe is about 5 years old. I just grabbed one off my shelf to bring in and talk about. So this one's a bit worn out. But in general, that's still a fairly stiff heel. Moving to this direction now, to the middle part of the foot, line number 3, we want to make sure that people understand where your arches are on both feet. You know, a lot of times when I'm working with people, I'll see somebody's got a higher arch on one foot than the other. You know, maybe they use one foot differently than the other, and the way their feet present on the ground can tell you that. If we look at that picture 3 there with the check next to it, that's got a good solid arch in it. That thing is, that's stiff. This one doesn't have quite as stiff an arch in it, and that's okay, because when I was in these, I didn't need to have that much support. Contrast it with the other shoe next to it, there's nothing in that little, you know, flimsy, stylish summer shoe. A lot of times people think that an arch support is to stop their foot from falling down. But with a lot of the people I work with, my job is to get them to understand where this is, because they don't get to it in time when they're walking or running or just standing, right? If you can't feel an arch when you're standing, your foot is rolling out, okay? And that's not necessarily good if you're just standing around. And then the last one on that list there, you know, I've had some changes of mind over the years about this one, a non-flexible midsole. And again, if you're a person who has a lot of laxity in your foot, ankle, and arch, then you may want a midsole that doesn't break down too easy. But you know, and if you compare those two shoes in those two pictures, you can see the difference, right? The one is just basically a sponge that I folded in half, and the other one is a pretty stiff shoe. But if you look at the bottom of this shoe, we've got a round center here, and then sort of a path to travel. And so this is a good representation to show you that when a foot hits the ground, you should hit, and you should have a little bit of flexibility to sort of rotate over towards your big toe. So the non-flexible midsole is there are applications where that would be very useful for patients, and there are applications where it might be restrictive. Someone like you, for instance, I would want a little bit of a rotation, but I would want some limitation too, because you do tend to hit pretty hard on the outside of your foot, and you do tend to roll pretty hard. This shoe has plenty of that, right? It's got, so that's too much. This is probably okay. The one in the picture there might be a little stiff for the average Joe person. So again, I started earlier by saying I don't want to endorse any particular brand or any particular shoe. What I want to help people understand is that these are things to look for. You should be able to feel, if you're just standing flat on both feet, you should be able to feel your heels. You should be able to feel your arches, and you should be able to feel your toes. Ideally, you'd have a little bit of room to spread those toes out, because when you walk, they should spread a little. Doing okay so far?
Yeah. Do you want this up or do you want it?
No, you can put us back on. We're almost to the point where. So a couple of other things, just because I know the clientele that we have here. A couple other things that I wanted to point out is some shoes have what's called a rocker on the front of them, and those are for people who have limited movement in their big toe. Maybe you've got a bunion or have had a fusion or a fracture or something like that, and it's major big toe not as mobile as it was when you were younger. Or possibly you've had a stroke and you've got tone and there's too much muscle activity going on there all the time. And so some shoes have what's called a rocker bottom on them. And this shoe, I don't know if you can see the difference, has more of a rock on it than this shoe. And the rock is the degree of up tilt here. This shoe has virtually none. This shoe has kind of a lot. And so if I were to just push on that, right, it gets me to a near what's called a toe off position where you're pushing with your big toe. Now a true rocker shoe would be a little taller and have even bigger a rock on it so that you wouldn't have to extend through that big toe to get to your other foot. And that can be useful if you have either a solid ankle AFO or even a very stiff AFO that does not allow you to move into a toe off position, or if you have a lot of tone, flexion tone in your big toe, and that big toe is always pushing down, the rocker will at least, give you the option to move through your foot and ankle without needing to have as much compensation through your hip and low back. All right, and so that's about all I really wanted to say at this point. Do you have any questions?
I have a few questions.
Sure.
Coming from that, I treat a primarily different patient population than you do, but we do share some things. I know a lot of my clients have different fabric they prefer in their shoes, whether it be a mesh or a leather sort of shoe. And I know some people prefer the leather shoes either for style or things like that. And I know I tend to err on the side that the leather shoes tend to be heavier, but they may also provide more stability. So I don't know if you can speak to different fabric makeups of shoes or if there's a pros and cons to that.
Sure. So when you look at the cost of a shoe, you're really looking, I think, at kind of two things. You're looking at what's going on here and what the shoe is doing in this section, and you're looking at what's going on here. This is a nice lightweight mesh material. It's very breathable. It's intended for, this is a running shoe. It's an athletic shoe. It's intended for you to be working and sweating in that shoe, and so the breathability is there to help keep your foot cool. The trade-off there is that it's fairly flexible. It doesn't have a lot of give. If you're a person who, if you were to get this shoe half a size too big and you were sliding around in it, it'd be very easy for you to slide off of the shoe, especially if your sensation was a little bit inhibited and you weren't able to feel exactly where you were in the shoe very well. So in a situation like that, a leather is going to be more restrictive. It's going to stop you from, it's going to give your boundaries, your regulation, a little bit of an uptick, right? You're going to have more things regulating you. In that case, you are right. A leather is going to be heavier. So there are certain trade-offs. You'll be hard up to find a material that is both stiffer and lighter and more breathable. So you've got to go with what works for you. In an AFO, certainly the harder the AFO, No, I don't want to make that statement. Actually, I was gonna do something that would have a lot of well in this cases. So let's not do that. But in general, there's a bit of a preference. There is always a trade-off, and it can take a little bit of trial and error to find something that works. Which then kind of brings me to this. You know, if you find something that works well for you, don't change it. I'll throw in a little piece of information. Usually shoe companies will do a production, a style production that lasts about 12 months. And usually there's like a fall version and then a summer version of that shoe. So for instance, you know, this GT 1000 we're looking at here, I think this was from 2 years ago, something like that, 3 years ago. They still make the 1000s, but over the years.
But I bought them in the fall.
Okay, and so you've got a fall version. This was a fall version the year I bought it. About once every 12 months, they upgrade it a little bit and they sort of change their. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but that's the option. So unless the shoe company makes a large adjustment to their format of that particular shoe, if it has been working for you, it's worth trying to stay with that. At least until you get to the point where you're working on adaptability. And that's another thing we didn't get into. I didn't want to make it too complicated, but you know, the things in life that tend to last are the things that can adapt. So at first in your rehab program, you may need XYZ shoe that is quite stiff with leather and blah, blah, blah. And as you start to improve, you may need to down-regulate where you're not getting so much input from or so much control from the shoe that you're in. And now you're starting to relearn how to use your foot well with the rest of your body. Did that answer that question?
No, that definitely did. I think also this might just be the last thing to speak to, is keeping in mind the kind of shoe that you are wearing with any orthotics that you have been given. I know it can be really easy to go into a run shop or something like that, and there's lots of things that get thrown at you, whether it be an adjusted orthotic, whether it be a custom orthotic or anything like that, something that would go into your shoe. Maybe could you give some thoughts on how to be healthily skeptical when you have suggestions from anybody really for what you're putting inside your shoe?
Sure. When a shoe company designs a shoe, they design it to the average foot. And if you have the average foot, that's great. It's probably going to work out for you 100% of the time, all the time. If you are a person who needs a little more support or a little different support in orthotic, it's important to understand whether it's an over-the-counter orthotic or even a custom orthotic, that is changing what's going on inside the shoe. So a shoe that has a lot of buildup in it, like the ones that we saw, the good quality shoe in the document earlier, that had a lot of buildup in it, there was a lot in there. An orthotic at that point might provide too much. It might knock you too far in the other direction. So when I think about, when I make orthotics for somebody, I try to recommend they get a shoe that has a very stiff heel, but not as much arch buildup on the inside, because I'm going to let the orthotic take care of that for them. Even an over-the-counter orthotic typically is going to give you, it's going to give you enough to know where your arch is and where your weight is, right? If you're loading your arch just in standing around and you can barely feel your heel, you'll understand that and be able to move off of it. But if you have a shoe that's got too much buildup in it, or it's got a substantial amount of buildup, and then you add an orthotic, it might be hard for you to tell the difference whether you're actually on your heel or on your orthotic, because the orthotic is being pushed up too high by the shoe. So, but you know, in general, really the thing I said earlier would still be my kind of go-to generalized rule, which is when you put that shoe on, orthotic added or not, can you feel that your weight is in your heel and you can recognize a little bit of contact with your arch and a little bit of awareness through your toes. But the load should still be going through your heel if you're just standing. Fair enough?
Yeah. Well, those are all the questions I have. If you don't have any parting words.
No, thanks for letting me ramble.
Of course. And if you have any further questions for any of us or for Josh, feel free to comment, reach out to us.
We will put that document on our website. I might update it a little bit, add a couple extra bells and whistles, just about things like rocker shoes and things like that, to help you all out.
And so since this is our last Steps Live of the week, make sure you keep an eye out for the schedule for next week. It will be going up on Monday, and thanks for watching.
Also, feel free to, if you have any questions about any of this, you can post, I think, to Facebook. Mm-hmm. You can post the comments of Facebook, and we can try and answer them a little more specifically for you.
Either a comment or this will be going up as a watch party, and you feel free to comment. There'll be someone on here monitoring it while that goes up too. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have. So thank you.